let me introduce our wonderful speaker, Carrie Gress. Carrie Gress has a doctorate in philosophy from the Catholic University of America and is the editor at the online women's magazine Theology of Home. She is the author of 11 books, including the Theology of Home series and The End of Woman. Her latest book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity, was just released in January. She and her husband and their 5 children live in Virginia. Carrie, thank you for coming so far for us today.
Goodness, well, thank you all so much for coming. I have to say, I have these mixed emotions right now because on the one hand, I feel incredibly blessed to be able to talk about Phyllis Schlafly because she's just been an incredible model, I think, of womanhood and how it's well lived in the many seasons and the way to think outside the box. But at the same time, it's a little daunting because I'm actually in the room with people that knew her well. So to be able to speak about her in these terms, I'm sure you'll correct me with whatever it is I get wrong. But today what we're going to talk about is the role of feminism. This is something that I know Phyllis tackled unlike anyone, and we would love to think that the problem of feminism has gone away, and I can tell you very explicitly it has not gone away, and in fact it's actually gotten worse because feminism used to be much more exclusively an issue among liberals, and now I'm finding that my biggest detractors are actually conservatives. So the fight has come home to us, and so we need to fight it anew. I got started in this kind of accidentally about 10 years ago. I wrote this book called The Marian Option, and in that book I was looking at the woman that's considered the most powerful woman in the world, and that is the Blessed Virgin Mary. Even National Geographic called her the most powerful woman in the world. And at that stage, Hillary Clinton was running for president, and I thought, she is nothing like the Blessed Virgin Mary. And yet, if she wins, she will be the most powerful woman in the world. And it was in that moment that I started comparing, the ways in which those two women are entirely different, diametrically opposed. And that really spun me off on this whole topic of feminism in a way that I actually had never dreamed of when I was in graduate school. I said aloud in my kitchen, I will never work on women's issues. But we all know God has a sense of humor, and so here I am, 11 books in, and I think 9 of them have been about women or related to women. So the first thing I want to do, especially for the young women in the room, is say a little bit about what feminism is, to define my terms a little bit. I think we're in a culture right now that would like to make feminism, kind of rebrand it into something good, and maybe this has been the case all along, but to really present feminism as something that's just good for women, or it's just about civil rights. And I think Phyllis was amazing on this issue because she was unflinching. I saw an interview with her a few weeks ago, and someone asked her if there was anything good about the women's movement, and her answer was very simple: no. And I loved that because I just felt like she didn't feel like she needed to give a big explanation about it. So the other thing that's happened is that we now have, Phyllis was making these incredible points about feminism long ago, but now we actually have the data, we actually have the science that shows how right she was about all of these issues that she's spoken about for so long. We know that women are less happy, that the numbers are incredible and staggering when you start looking at all the metrics of the happiness metrics, things like depression, anxiety, substance abuse, divorce, all of these kinds of elements point to some very unhappy women. We know the war between the sexes has probably never been uglier, especially if you look at the younger generations. And I hear all the time, we don't know how to date anymore. Nobody knows what the rules are. We don't, there's a hookup culture, and then there's just sort of weird relationships. There's obviously the birth dearth that we're seeing because Western women have not had children, so we're importing people to fill that space. We have the mental health issue, which there's been incredible data done by this. Some of you are familiar with the work of Erica Commissar, who has really highlighted very bravely what's happening in mental illness, especially among the most recent generations. Her point is we have to take care of our children from the ages of 0 to 3 and not pass them around to other people. And if we do, we're going to be seeing these mental illness issues. And this is what we're seeing now with the cluster B issues in particular. Then Erica calls those issues and a deficit of affection is where they have come from. So that's plaguing us. We also have loneliness. I think women are the fabric of a culture and a society, and we're the ones that see where the needs are, the lonely individual or people that need to be pulled in different ways, and that's certainly not happening. And then, of course, we have the abortion issue, which feels like, we had obviously the big victory of Roe v. Wade, but now we're in sort of a different situation because we realized that as we were fighting Roe, the culture was being corrupted dramatically, and that's what we're seeing on the state level, is this issue of we've abandoned the issue of abortion on the cultural level, and that's, I think, one of the frontiers that we need to get back to. So again, Phyllis saw all of this. She saw that feminism was really about power and control, and it was an ideology, and it was something that we needed to get rid of. We needed to get back to something healthy. So what I want to do now is actually go through 6 qualities of Phyllis that, Phyllis was totally singular. I don't think any of us will be able to embody all of these, but I think that we can be inspired in our lives by at least one of them, or maybe several. So I want to go through the things that I've been able to pull out of who she was based on her speeches and her books and her writing, and see what is it we can learn from today. How do we take this legacy of Phyllis forward? How do we use her gifts in a way that can really transform the culture the way that she did? So the first one is Phyllis understood that the dynamic that she was fighting wasn't about her. I think this was one of the things that I was really struck by, because she had so many accomplishments, and there were so many different things and so many different places where she could have just stopped and said, "I'm done here. I just defeated the ERA. That was big enough." But you also didn't hear. I know when I was rereading Feminist Fantasies, you don't hear her grandstanding and pointing out, what she did, even though nobody would blame her, and everybody would actually expect her to talk about her accomplishments. So she certainly didn't rest on her laurels, and I think this is such an important point for women today, because the culture has shifted so much that everything is supposed to be about who we are. When you look at social media, when you look at influencers, and I think this is part of the problem, part of the chaos that we're seeing in the conservative movement, is just the fact that clickbait has become so attractive and compelling and easy money. And so people are willing to give up the principles that they have in order to go where it is that they think they need to go to get more clicks. And I see this all the time. So we've taken that idea of this is not about us, this is about something principled, this is about truth, this is about life and goodness, and we've turned it in on itself and made it about us. So that's the first thing. The second element, of course, is that Phyllis was brilliant, so smart. I think this is, one of the pieces that the left obviously hates about her, because they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to deal with this woman who was so brilliant and had this mind for strategy and could outfox them. And so I think this is one of the things that we can all do too, is figure out what are my gifts, where are my resources, how do I use them as best I can, how do we think outside of the box, and how do we really frame things in a new and fresh and compelling way. And I think that's, it seems like she was always kind of doing that, reinventing herself, finding new ways to say things, and you can see that in her articles. She's using contemporary films and TV shows and elements in the culture to really drive her points home. The one thing that has changed significantly also in the culture is just the fact that Phyllis had her articles that she could write in different places, and she had this huge national audience. And I think because of the fact that the media has fractured so much, most people don't watch the networks anymore. It's much harder to make these grand statements that everybody will see. But I think that that's also can work to our advantage, and I think we see this in sort of alternative media, where we have the capacity to make arguments and to get into the fight in a way that would have been totally inaccessible, say 20, 25 years ago when the mainstream media was really king. So I think that that's an exciting opportunity that we have, is really to start finding different ways to make new and fresh arguments by using our intellect and our gifts and our abilities. The third thing I will say about Phyllis is that she had a sense of humor. And again, here, I'm sure that the stories that you all could tell about Phyllis and her sense of humor are just abundant. But one of the things that I picked up in watching videos about her is that she has a tell. Like, you could tell when she knew she was going to just deliver the zinger. She sort of cocked her head, and she had a little twinkle in her eye, and her mouth curved up a little bit, and sure enough, here's the pitch. She's coming. And I think this is obviously such an important piece. Humor is so important on so many levels. But one of the things in her book that she talks about was don't tell jokes around feminists, because feminists don't have a sense of humor. And this is one of the things actually I was able to discover kind of the source of this in the latest book that I just wrote, that we have copies available of, called Something Wicked. There's a wonderful psychiatrist named Ian McGilchrist that has written this book called The Master and His Emissary, and he talks about how the human brain works, and it's meant to be led by the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is really meant to be the master of our mind. And the right hemisphere is where we get meaning and emotion and music and poetry and all the important pieces that make up life. And the left hemisphere, he said, this is where you get this kind of focused fight or flight thinking. But the left hemisphere doesn't have any context, and this is why feminists can't be funny, because they're so focused and thinking on this left hemisphere direction that they don't have a context to be able to actually be funny. And this is one of the things I talk about. If we're trying to get out of a feminist mindset, you need to refine your sense of humor and get back to humor and context and looking at the deeper meaning of things. And I think Phyllis obviously had that in abundance, and it was really probably very infectious to be around. The fourth thing is that Phyllis was always a lady. Here again, Phyllis says you shouldn't use that word, lady, because it's not gender neutral. But I think as a woman much younger than she, it's so edifying to see a woman who was always dressed beautifully, carried herself well, spoke articulately. She was not nasty. She wasn't mean. She wasn't unkind. She really held herself in a way that was always respectable. And I think that is a model that unfortunately we don't have many of today. But the other thing that I realized in this, and in my research for my book, Something Wicked, I actually go back to the 1700s and the 1800s, and I look at the first wave of feminism to see how a lot of the ideas that came about in the second wave are actually already there in the first wave. But one of the things that I discovered was that the socialists in 1890 wanted to make women angry. Why do they want to make women angry? Because they realized if a woman is angry, she will be much more politically expedient than if she's happy and peaceful and content. So this is actually where the idea of consciousness raising came from. It was the socialists in America in the 1890s. These people went on to be the eugenicists, and that you won't be surprised when I tell you the name of the journal that I found this in. The journal was called Lucifer. So this was the idea, and the idea of consciousness raising that, of course, was rampant in the 1960s and 70s, and people like Kate Millett assured us that it was from China. Didn't realize that China actually got it from the socialists in the United States back in the 1890s. But the idea was to make women unhappy, to aggravate them, to make them mad, to make them angry. And we can see this legacy in the culture today. And women do not have a sense of controlling their own emotions anymore. We have this sense that we need to feel every feel, and everybody around us needs to know exactly how we feel about things. And it's incredible because nothing will undermine womanhood like that promise that somehow if we make everybody know how miserable we are, that somehow we're going to be improving the lives of others around us. So I think that was one of the things that was just such a gift that Phyllis gives us, continues to give us, is this mature woman who knew who she was. She knew herself as a wife and a mother, and she was mature in her faith, in her intellect, and most specifically in her emotions. So the fifth thing that I think is vitally important that Phyllis did was to really value so much motherhood. This is one of the things that I think even when I wrote my last book 2 years ago called The End of Woman, I felt sort of reticent to talk about this idea of motherhood because in certain respects it just felt a little bit dated. And I thought, how do I reframe this? And one of the things that I was able to do was start talking about motherhood in much more generic terms. I think we think of motherhood only biologically, but if you look at history, if you look at the richness of culture and history, you see that motherhood is so much bigger than just biological children. There's a spiritual element of it. Women are called to be spiritual mothers. This is why even in religious orders, women, the abbess is called the mother superior. Motherhood is something that every woman is meant to embody, not just women who have had children. And what do I mean by that? Womanhood is meant to be life-giving. We have all these different ways in which women can bring life to the world, obviously biologically, spiritually, but we can also do this in the workplace. We can do this in our homes and all of these different milieu. And I think I get the question a lot, what should I do? Should I stay at home or should I work or do I do both? And I can't answer those specific questions for specific families. I know I can answer it for my own family with my husband, but I can't go into the minutiae and understand and discern for people what it is that they should do because everybody knows their circumstances are slightly different. But if you look at the culture today, just imagine what it would look like if every woman actually understood that her role was meant to be a life giver. Imagine the women that you work with or women in careers. If they understood it wasn't about their career, it wasn't about them, it was about bringing life to the place in which they are working. It's not about taking, it's about giving. Suddenly, I think culture would change dramatically if we understood that about ourselves. And I think this is what Phyllis certainly gave us a model of. But I think this is something that we need to really help younger women understand. And the exciting thing is I'm seeing a lot of younger women open to this in the way that I don't see among particularly boomers and Gen X women, that there's this kind of new spirit that younger women are open to this in ways that they haven't been previously. So I think that's very hopeful. But it really is motherhood that has been stripped from us by feminism. And that's something that we can give back to women very, very easily. It doesn't take a lot of money to help a woman realize she was made to bring life to others. There's that great line of Edith Stein's, the culture needs not what we do, but who we are. And I think that's what she meant by it, was this understanding of ourselves as life givers, and no matter what stage of life or season we're in. And then the sixth thing that I think Phyllis really gave us was certainly the power of faith and prayer. She recognized that feminism was an ideology. She recognized that it had a connection to communism. And this is one of the things that I bring out in my book, Something Wicked, is I think I go one step further and I actually think feminism has become its own religion. I think it has created a shadow church and it mimics Christianity. And this is what the backbone of that book is recognizing, well, if it's a shadow church, what's it worshiping? It's the idol of independent womanhood. That's what feminism worships, and that's the whole goal. In addition to that, you also see there are three elements that feminism has had since the early 1800s that I call the three commandments. The first one is contempt for men. The second one is promiscuity. And the third one is the occult. And I found all of these embodied in a character by the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, who lived in the early 1800s. He was a romantic poet. He was a complete awful man who believed that no one could stop him until he finally died in a boating accident. A storm killed him at 29 years old. But he was married to Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, and his mother-in-law was Mary Wollstonecraft, who was considered the grandmother of feminism. And his father-in-law is someone that none of you know, but you know his ideas, because Marx picked them up. And his name was William Godwin, and he believed that matrimony and marriage was a kind of slavery and wanted to get rid of it. And of course, Marx picked this idea up as well. So Percy Shelley, with his heritage of this very deeply feminist family, what he called the women's revolution, created this woman named Sithna in one of his poems. And in this poem, she embodies contempt for men, promiscuity, and the occult. Well, if you fast forward, look at what we're dealing with young women in particular on college campuses, in social media, all over. Women have been told through and through that we should have contempt for men, that we need to be promiscuous, and that we should be involved in the occult, whether it's tarot cards, horoscopes, manifesting, you name it, it's out there. It's all part of the package. And that's been around for well over 200 years. We also have the other thing I touched on, the idea of emotions. Christianity has faith, hope, and love. Feminism has rage, anger, and contempt. Those are the three emotions that are sown into the movement. And Phyllis talked a lot about this idea of the rancorous woman, or the woman who was very easily offendable. And then you have, of course, abortion being the sacrament of it. Because if you worship female autonomy, women have to be free from having their own children. They have to be free of their fertility. And this is why abortion is such a key issue for women in the culture today, because their autonomy hinges on this idea that they can control their children and that their careers are more important than their children are. So I think that, obviously there was so much more to Phyllis, and I hope that in the years to come, more of her YouTube videos will be made available. I hope we'll hear more about her, because I think she's so needed. She was so prescient. In fact, as I've written my books, I've had different ideas, and I'll go look at Phyllis's work, and I'll be like, oh, she had that idea first. I have to go back and give her credit. But I think there was really nobody like her, certainly a force of nature. But I think that the best thing that she did, in addition to all these incredible elements on the political level, is she just helped us understand what it meant to be a woman, and how to do that well, how to do that beautifully, how to balance all the aspects of womanhood, all the seasons of life. And I think that is just obviously the most incredible gift that you can give, both to your own family, but on a much broader scale, which is obviously what she did for all of us. So thank you very much. Did you want to do questions?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, and if you could repeat the question when they ask it so that we
Yep.
can catch it on audio, that would
Absolutely.
be great.
Yep. And while you're thinking of your questions, I'd like to introduce my daughter. This is actually my daughter, Catherine, traveled with me. I think this is the first time any of my immediate family, has actually seen me speak, because I don't enjoy speaking, and so I always feel like their scrutiny is going to be intense. So I don't usually let them come, but it worked out that she was able to come this trip, and it's been a real blessing. So yes, that I don't know if I can repeat all of that, but in any event, Betty Friedan stormed off because he's had the audacities to suggest that women are life givers. Betty Friedan has actually been one of my favorite people to study. As much as I can say any of these women are fun to study, it's really been awful, and I don't wish it upon anyone having to read all of this material. And in fact, that's been one of the challenges, is like, oh, I have to go back and read that again. It's really brutal. But Betty Friedan has been really interesting to study. Her private papers are not going to be available until 2035. But one of her friends, David Horowitz, I think is the name of the author, was fascinated by her because he realized that she was using all of these communist and Saul Alinsky tactics on college women and young people, and she was totally under the radar. Like, she never was called up for like the McCarthy trials or anything like that. Like, he just thought this was amazing that she was so successful at integrating communist ideas into the culture without outing herself. And so what does he do? He writes a book and he outs her. So he has this book called The Making of the Feminine Mystique that I did a lot of research in, and he talks about how she was involved in this organization called the Congress for American Women, which was actually shut down by the U.S. Committee on House Committee on Un-American Activities, because it was complete Soviet propaganda. They were basically just saying, we women can have this idealized life, their children go somewhere else, they get as many abortions as they want, you can get a divorce with a postcard, just really clearly propaganda. And so it was shut down, but she was a college student at that point. And one of the things that I was able to do was compare some of her work with Bella Dodd. And if any of you, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bella Dodd, but for those who aren't, Bella Dodd was this communist activist, especially in the area of education in the United States. And she was the one that set up legally this Congress for American Women. And so I could see in what Dodd drafted, and she had this huge conversion under Archbishop Fulton Sheen eventually, and became also from Peoria, Illinois. And became a Catholic and risking her life. I mean, she was almost killed because she gave up the Communist Party. So she's writing in it the statutes of why the Congress for American Women is set up. Well, I then went and read Betty Friedan's book, and you see it's the exact same purpose. She's using these same ideas that she got as a college student, and what she's doing also is putting it in very compelling emotional terms. I mean, the feminine mystique is basically about like why women are missing out because they're stuck in what she calls the comfortable concentration camp of home. So she's using really heightened language to make it clear that the home is a horrible place and you've got to get out of it. And why is she doing this? Because she's a follower of Marx and Engels, and she knows the revolution is going to be won by sending women out to do productive work. So it's really amazing to start digging into her communist roots and just really see, the way in which these ideas, of course, Kate Millett is another one who was deeply involved in the New Left and ideas from all kinds of very disturbed Marxists. And so, yeah, it's definitely not fun reading, but it's very eye-opening, and you just, these patterns keep turning up and showing up that, feminism to its core is deeply anti-Christian. And even the Elizabeth Cady Stanton believed deeply that it was a tool used by men. Christianity was a tool that men used to enslave women. This is back in the 1860s, 1840s. This was the idea. So there's a lot of deeply corrupt ideas in the feminists, and I think they've been very much glossed over to look like these, very virtuous and Christian women. And then when you get into the details, you realize very quickly this is not Christian, and in fact the antithesis of it. So thank you. Okay, so the question is, she's asking if we're going to tear down feminism, which many people have considered themselves beneficiaries of, what is it that we put in its place? And I think this is a great question and something that I thought a lot about deeply. The problem is that feminism has had this incredible capacity to make itself look good and to rebrand itself and to make it look like it has helped more than it actually has. And I think that's part of the problem, and why I thought it was so fantastic that Phyllis said, no, there's nothing good that has come from the feminist movement. I've had this conversation with Mallory Millett too. She is Kate Millett's sister, and she said, certainly there are things that we can change on a policy level. There are things that we can change in education. There are things that we can change on all kinds of levels. We didn't have to burn the whole system down. And that's the problem with feminism, is because it's trying to change the nature of womanhood. This is, again, if you go back to the early 1800s, you can see very explicitly the Industrial Revolution comes around. Suddenly the home, which had been the center of life for every aspect, business, entertainment, education, all of that happened at the home. Women are now displaced. Children suddenly become liabilities instead of assets, because at that stage you could have a child helping you out around the home at 3 and 4. Suddenly you don't know what to do with your children because you have to go work in the factory, and home becomes a denigrated place. And the answer that the feminists offer, and you see this from the very beginning with Mary Wollstonecraft, is women are going to be happier if they are more like men. And that's where things get off track. So I think that, if we're talking about something like education, and this is one of the things that feminists do, they'll say, oh, you can't talk about this because you have a PhD. Or they will say, men can't talk about this because you're men. Or don't you want to help women? It's just this first guard, this first layer that protects the movement from any kind of scrutiny. The problem is that it's just factually not true. I have all this incredible research on, the distinctions between, consider someone like Elizabeth Ann Seton. Sorry, I always get her confused with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But Elizabeth Ann Seton, she founds the first all-girls school in the early 1800s. And by 1900s, there are 3,500 Catholic schools in the United States, most of which are being run by religious nuns. So this is not the case that education wasn't happening. And you also have this, of course, the huge change because of the Industrial Revolution, people have money to be able to suddenly send someone else other than their first son to school. So I think that one of the problems with feminism is it has made this very narrow narrative that we all have been convinced of, like women weren't educated and women weren't allowed to work and they weren't allowed to vote. And when you look at the specifics, you see, no, actually there was a lot of change happening already. A lot of it has to do with economics. Certainly even Phyllis talked a lot about just how much changed because of technology changing. I know I could never do the things that I do if I had to spend all day washing my family's laundry. I have 5 children. Or if I didn't have the conveniences of my kitchen. And that's certainly a Phyllis point. So I think that's, it's important to know and to give credit in terms of what it has done and what it hasn't. And that's, feminism has made itself this savior, that anything that's happened in a woman's life that is good is suddenly, it was because of feminism. And I think that's arguable. But the question then becomes, well, what goes in its place? Well, this is, I think, an interesting question, and I don't think it's the right question, because I think if you have to replace feminism with another word, what's really going on is people are saying, we still need women to be considered victims. And that's what happened.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you need another word. I'm saying you need another vision.
And I'll get to that. But what I'm trying to say is address the idea. She just said she needs another vision, because I think these are connected. Feminism has set up the myth that women are the victims and men are the victimizers. This is part of Kate Millett's whole effort. Certainly this came about more in the 70s and 80s. But we see this all over, where it feels like there's this continual apology going to women and this continued sense of we don't have equality yet. But nobody can actually point out where we're not equal. And equality itself is one of those things that you're never going to get to, because you can't make different things equal. This is Aristotle's idea from millennia ago. You cannot make things that are different the same or equal. So I think it's sort of a fool's errand in that respect. And I think also we don't have words for masculinism. We don't have a word for children. I mean, if you really want to look at who the victims are in a culture, I think it's children. And we don't have infantism, or it's not something that we pay attention to. So I think that's part of our problem is we feel like we need it when we don't need it. But then the question becomes, well, what do we replace it with? Well, I think we go back to the language that we use for men and children and women. I don't think we need a special area that gives women a special kind of status that we somehow have to keep feeding. And that's a problem. In fact, I spent a lot of time actually praying about, is there supposed to be another word? What's the other word? And I actually have come up with words that didn't exist, or concepts that didn't exist before. I have a book called The Anti-Mary Exposed. And nobody knew how to spell it. Is there a hyphen in it? Do you capitalize Mary in it? It was a new idea. And then I also have a series of books called Theology of Home, and no one had ever heard of that either. So I thought, okay, the Holy Spirit is going to help me with this. He will give me a word. And it's been 10 years now and I haven't gotten a new word. But I think the reason is because if we have a new word, it still suddenly goes back to the same thing, this idea of women as needing some sort of special help, when in fact we don't. We need to recognize the vulnerabilities of womanhood, but I don't think we need to go to something else. So I think we need to drop it and get back to real language, real understanding of human nature, both male and female, and in complementarity. I think John Paul II has incredible work on this, and this is one of the biggest struggles, is that he used the word new feminism 3 times in 26 years of his pontificate, and there are many women in the church who think that meant keep using the word. And so we have a lot of confusion that comes up about that, which I discuss in my book, and if anybody wants to talk to me about that, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But he recognized the importance of fertility. He recognized the importance of women being in the context of being in relationship with men. You can't just take a woman out and make her an individual and study us that way. We're meant to be in community. We're meant to have our vulnerability recognized and be treated carefully and kindly, because there's nothing more vulnerable than a pregnant woman or a woman who's just had a baby, postpartum. That's something that we have to, we can't do all of that ourselves. And the idea has been that we can, that's been the lie, but we end up marrying someone and it's the state, and that's who's really benefiting from it. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, but it's complicated, but I think there's a way out of it which gets us cleanly out of that language and actually speaking in real terms that have meaning instead of an ideology that has so much baggage. It's just deadly. That's a great question. Okay, so her question is where did this idea that women have always been oppressed come from, and how do we combat that currently today? The first thing is, of course, it came from feminism and this goal. You just see this in Mary Wollstonecraft, this idea of egalitarianism. It's really interesting. Mary Wollstonecraft started out as an Anglican, then she became a dissenting Christian, and then she eventually became a Unitarian, which means that she didn't believe in the Trinity and she didn't believe in the divinity of Christ. And part of the reason why that happened was because she believed that any kind of male mediator was going to stifle her potential as a woman, that we needed to get rid of priests, pastors, popes, and even Christ himself, because that would be a block to our relationship with God, because she saw God in very enlightened, rationalistic terms. So this is kind of the seed where it comes from, and it's at this stage. You also see a lot of, and this is, I go into this in my book, The End of Woman. You see this pattern where the early feminists in the 1800s are looking at the abolitionist movement, the effort to get rid of slavery, and they basically say, well, we're suffering the same thing, which of course anybody who knows the details of slavery is going to say, you very upper class women in the United States, in fact, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was so upper class, she and her friend Lucretia Mott had to actually ask their husbands, what is it that lower class women would complain about in the culture today? They didn't know what poor women were suffering from, and so they had to ask their husbands for ideas about it because they were incredibly wealthy. So they were imposing upon the movement this idea that women were just like the slaves. And then you see the exact same thing happen again with the civil rights movement. Women saying they've been so oppressed, they've been maltreated. Well, the reality is that this is coming from this model of them trying to be exactly like men. But if you shift the model to women are meant to be mothers and life givers, and offer this incredible gift of the home to be able to launch their children out into the world as individuals who are healthy and then will be contributing to it, you're going to get a very perverted vision of what it looks like to be enslaved by something. And so this masculine model is what's reigned. And she mentioned that her students thought that all this oppression was happening in the past. And part of that is because I think as conservatives, we've done a very poor job of filling in the culture with cultural models. And this is obviously why Phyllis is important, but I think we can do a better job of helping women understand the beauty and the gift that the home is, what it means to be a mother. And if you look back in your own kind of history of your life, like, when have you ever seen anybody on TV really promote the idea of motherhood in an ordered way? You've got maybe Ma on the Little House on the Prairie, and that's kind of it. You don't see women really digging into it, and usually it's a mom that's at home. She's on drugs and she's got mental illness, and she's mommy dearest kind of character. So I think that's a real area where we can make some great strides in just talking about just the incredible gift and beauty that it is, and restore it back to that sense where it's not a bad word anymore to talk about staying home with your children, and just see the importance of it. And some of that is happening already with the discussion about mental health. That's something that I'm seeing a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists talk about in ways that nobody was talking about even 10 years ago. So theology of home was an idea that came to me on my treadmill about 10 years ago. I was just thinking about, as a mom, all I really want to do is get my family home to heaven. And then I realized, wait a minute, so the home is meant to be a foretaste of heaven. And we see these common elements in the home, and we see them in our churches, and we can say them about heaven. So there are things like light, comfort, nourishment, safety, all of those beautiful elements that are, make a home, a place. Hospitality obviously is another one. Makes a home or a church rich, beautiful. People want to be in those kinds of homes, and that's on purpose. God means the home to be a foretaste of heaven, and that's one of the reasons why motherhood is so important, because we have this opportunity to allow people to know what heaven feels like by being loved and known and cared for and whatnot. Obviously, we can see the opposite, which is, many people find the home hellish, because that happens on all kinds of levels too, tragically. So that was the initial kernel of an idea, and some friends of mine and I got together and we created this book called Theology of Home. There's now 4 of them that we've made. The first one is really kind of digs into that theology about light and comfort, safety, and so on. And then the second one is called The Spiritual Art of Homemaking. The third is, we took the theme of water and built the book around that. And then the fourth one is actually about flowers and the liturgical year. So they're beautifully photographed. They're really great books. They've been very big, like bridal shower gifts and things like that. And then I have a blog that actually goes with it that I publish 8 articles every weekday. And it's basically like, I call it the poor woman's magazine, because I didn't have the resources to start my own magazine, but I thought, I know what women like to read. We want a mixture, look at regular magazines. And it's through regular magazines that the culture's been destroyed, through Glamour, Ms., Cosmopolitan. All these magazines is what has allowed women to believe that all these awful things are part of womanhood. So why are we not doing the opposite? And so that's what the blog Theology of Home has become. And I've been doing it for 8 years. And every day we have different articles. Some of them we write in-house, and then others, most of them are collected from travel sites or just different. Some of them are theological, some of them, just a whole array of things, cooking tips or recipes, just things that women really enjoy absorbing. And so that's what we've been doing on that front as well. Yeah, it's theologyofhome.substack.com, or you can just go to theologyofhome.com as well. We'll get you to the same place. So, yeah, I think that's it's directly related. If you don't have a mother to watch a child, or to care for a child, the child is going to try to find that love in other places, and they're never going to be as good. Obviously the same with God and faith, and those are really important. But it's really that breakdown of the family and the structure and the sexual mores. I think that's such a key piece. This idea of the promotion of promiscuity has, the fabric has just been torn apart. And a couple of years ago, I did an interview with Dennis Prager, and he was really funny because he said, first of all, he said he had a debate with Betty Friedan, which I'd never heard about when he was a young man, and she actually stormed off, and he just stood there and kept talking. And I thought, that was genius. Like, he didn't end, he just kept talking. Well, guess what happened? Betty came back. She tried her typical tantrum, and it didn't work, and so she came back. But anyway, he said, the sexual revolution happened, and he thought, this has, been a man's dream for 4,000 years now, and it's happening. And I think that's the piece that women don't realize, is we are the ones that changed our behavior, which kicked off all of the problems that we're seeing now. When you end monogamy, you are going to have disastrous effects. And this is why we can't have nice things. We don't have dating. We don't have rom-coms. We've destroyed the path through which people understood how it is that they met each other and they got married and they had children. All of those roles have been really decimated for kind of the woke ideology and reinventing ourselves and whatnot. And all of those things, I think, are of a piece. So if you look at my book, The End of Woman, I actually go through philosophically the whole history of feminism and show how we went from Mary Wollstonecraft to the trans movement, and that they're all really built on one another. So in any event, I hope that answers your question. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We had so many more questions, and I'm sorry to cut it off. I just don't want people to feel like they can't move on. I know it's a work day, but Carrie is still here if you'd like to continue to chat. I have questions for her. She does have some of her books here at the back of the room to buy. With Eagle Forum Education Legal Defense Fund, we have some of our books back here as well, including the readers. And I just want to thank every single one of you for coming to this event today. We will be in touch by email and permit you to opt in. I'm one of those people who doesn't think you should be added to an email list if you don't consent. So we will be in touch, though, following up. And if you'd like to continue to follow Eagle Forum Education Legal Defense Fund, we would love to be able to send you alerts and to let you know that this is an annual event that we hold, and we hope to see many, if not all of you, next year. Thank you very much.